Okay, hello everyone. Steve and I are back in a discussion about mental healing again. That's one of our main topics, since we have some personal experience with that, and we like to look at what other people are saying. And there is this therapist called Daniel Mackler from America, and he's very open and expressive about his experiences as a psychotherapist for 10 years. And then that was in the past. So at the time of his YouTube videos, he is no longer a therapist. I'm not sure what he does for a living now, but I love his messages. I love how honest and direct he is. He's very public about his personal experiences and feelings, even if some people might take offense to them,
Yeah.
because he talks about the friction that happens when he heals, or when he's in the healing process. He's still in the healing process, obviously, years later, but he loves how much he has discovered about himself, how much he has rediscovered himself. So I wanted to talk about that today, and maybe compare with our own lives, and whether that is a valuable message. I don't know. What were
Yeah.
your impressions from the video?
Well, the impressions were good. I'm having these little firing things off my brain, like ideas, that might derail the start.
Sure.
But the topic is honesty.
Mhm.
So before we get on to, I guess, exactly what he's talking about, I was just in my mind, I was thinking about this concept of, like, he has been honest with a lot of his family, his friends, and, like, because he's realized when he's not, it's damaging to
Mhm.
him, to his soul, his psyche, his spirit, his being, his personality, whatever term you want to use, his happiness. And it's an interesting concept to me because honesty is a double, like,
Edged
give and
sword.
take. Yeah, like, because obviously it can hurt people, but then
Mhm.
it can also hurt ourselves. So when we're honest, let's say, topics we're going to be talking about in a minute is, childhood upbringing, for example. And if your parents, um, and lots of parents do, is use children and raise children in a "you must do what I say, not as I do" almost kind of way of doing things, and that's basically hypocrisy, a lie. And so, when you get older, you want to do the truth. But the problem with the truth is you need to be able to take it yourself as well. So if someone's honest and true to you about things, then you also have to be willing to, um, either accept it, take it on board and process it, or go, actually, you know what, I don't need to hear that, and move past it. But one of the things we struggle with in society is honesty. And it leads to a lot of falling out, I guess, because one side doesn't always accept the honesty. So he himself seems to do that. He seems to accept it. So if people are honest with him, he seems to be like, okay, that helps. And then he's honest with people as well. But most of the time we have this justification almost, I'm going to speak my mind now. Like, a lot of people go to the extreme when they're trying to be honest. They go to
Mhm.
I'm just going to spew all this honesty on people and expect them to just be okay with it.
It's my right. Yeah.
It's my right. And then if they start being honest back, then it's like, oh no, no, they get, like, they themselves then get upset and, offended. And it takes a lot of maturity on both sides and emotional understanding to have a conversation, not just a one way, this is my honesty, here, have it, and then walk away.
Yeah. Both
And I think,
sides need to be open for
yeah,
pain and
yes. And if they're
vulnerability.
not, then that's where it becomes hard. And I think that's what he's talking about in his discussions, is where he's tried to be honest with people and they don't accept it.
Right.
Because,
The impression I got is it's not that he's going around telling people whatever is on
oh
his
yeah,
mind. It's not
yeah,
like that. He
no, no,
is he's working on himself. He's being true to
yes,
himself, or at least trying to. And that already is difficult for some people to watch.
yeah,
He says things like, people notice him changing and becoming different. And some people, like his parents, for example, say, "Oh, we miss the old Daniel. Where is this nice boy that we used to have with us.
Compliant is a good
Yeah.
word.
In another video, he says that discovering yourself is, by definition, an act of rebellion, because it comes with going against norms. And so people like norms. Well, they've learned to be comfortable with norms. And I think nobody always likes norms and laws and rules, but as long as they have this uncomfortable equilibrium,
It's consistent.
they want to stick with it. And whenever someone says something about it, it can lead to conflict because they're being honest. So you can't really deny it. You have to kind of suppress what they're saying.
Yeah, that's what's fascinating about human psychology, is it's a change. So it's not necessarily the act. So the act itself, if someone from birth is like being rebellious or like invert commas rebellious, true to themselves, saying this is how I'm going to do it, that eventually, if the parents and whatever can't like punish it out of them, and it's just who they are as a teenager, as a young adult, that's the norm, and people just accept that. And actually, a lot of people will admire it. A lot of people are like, oh, you're so honest and you're so true to yourself and whatever, because that's the status quo. But then if you change that, that's when people get really confused and don't like it. Like if that person started being compliant and more like just doing what people told them, everyone would be like, "Oh, you're suddenly like, why have you changed? You're being like almost like a robot or a doormat or whatever." They're safe. Everyone else's safety is taken away of that norm, as you say. And it's the same with in this situation, which is the more common situation, where once you start realizing that you've been lying to yourself by obeying or by doing what other people want you to do, when naturally you don't want to do it, and that causes pains inside, trauma inside. He talks about trauma.
He mentions an electrical fence or wall, and he says that we all have these limitations that essentially we put on ourselves, I mean, internally. He talks about splitting off parts of your personality and forcing them underground. And then when you unravel that, you come up against an electric wall. And that reminded me a lot of negative reinforcement. How you can teach someone to do something or to avoid something by giving them electric shocks or hurting them in whatever way. And then it goes into their unconscious and they behave that way. Anyway, so when he is able to break through some of the electric walls in his subconscious, other people become inspired and excited about that, and they want to do the same. But when they get hit by their own electric shock, then they feel the pain, and they might not be as far along as he is in his healing, or they might not be as prepared to feel the pain that goes along with it necessarily, and so they want to avoid him or shun him or punish him because no, being honest is not okay. Go away.
Yeah. Well, that's again the grieving process. So he talks about that as well, and it's always nice, I guess, affirmation or confirmation to when people who have been, I guess, in positions of authority or on their own journey, who talk about things that I guess I have in the last sort of few years started to really wrap my head around. And again, that is the grieving process, is like loss, is how important that is to us as humans to mourn and take time to cry and feel over the things that the traumas that we've been through when we're going through this honest process, because that pain, that electric barrier, is actually part of that grieving process. But most people can't then get to the next step. They then retreat, because again, it's acceptance, it's pain, it's you have to then accept that this is what's happened to you. And actually, most people prefer to live in denial.
I just thought of a metaphor, and I'd like to know your opinion if it's apt. So someone I watched on Twitch said he doesn't drink alcohol because it's like borrowing fun from the future. So that means it's going into debt. So you're having a lot of fun one night, more than your body usually supports for one day, and then you pay for it the following days. And in our childhood, we suppress painful situations, and then it's like we go into debt, and in later years that can come up, and then we can repay the debt and by going through the pain and then actually allowing it. So maybe that's one way of thinking of it, how many people don't like therapy or healing in general because of the pain associated with it. But
Yes.
that's a tiny price compared to the freedom and the fulfillment that you get if you stick it through.
Yes. No, that's a very, very good metaphor that again you end up in debt and you have to then go back and pay it back almost through different ways, like again therapy or meditate, like
But it's natural because the child is not able, or
yeah.
it's more intense for a child to go through that pain. So it's totally normal to
Yeah,
suppress it.
you're not self-aware enough. Like you're not self-aware enough. You're not well, maybe you are self-aware enough. Maybe you're too self-aware. Maybe it's the opposite. But you haven't got the ability to process it. Things are more intense and extreme.
Well, it's an interesting question. What's the difference between a child and an adult in this context?
Yeah, it's you feel the pains more intensely, maybe, and maybe not. Maybe you have no barriers against it. Because again, if someone takes your toy off of you, if someone takes your toy off of you as a child, like an adult or another child, you scream like bloody murder, like it's the worst thing in the whole universe.
Yeah.
Because that's what you want at that time. Whereas an adult, if someone, I guess, same thing. Some people have cars as toys. If someone takes their car off them, then it's going to be the same reaction, maybe, or different reactions, or different ways of processing it.
Yeah.
Trying to think of
One difference is as an adult, you can think in more complex ways, and therefore you're able to understand nuances better. It's the rules about society and the world and yourself are not so black and white. Your sense of justice, for example, is not as naive. You're more open to imbalance. For example, if I watch my nieces, they're 2 and 4 years old. If one needs to have exactly as much of the same thing as the other, otherwise it's unfair, and they get really upset.
Yeah. You can't deal in specifics very well as a child, I guess. You struggle to, like, everything has to be absolute. Like, if that person gets 4 pieces of chocolate, then I should get 4 pieces of chocolate. If that person gets an hour on the PlayStation, I should get an hour on the PlayStation. Never mind that yesterday you had 2 hours and that person only had one. It's like, what, today it needs to be.
Another difference is children are dependent on adults for their physical survival and well-being, and usually also for their emotional well-being. So they need you to give them a praise, for example, because they haven't learned to do that for themselves yet. And adults often haven't either, but they're now able to if they work on it.
Yeah. Like a lot of the traumas, I guess as a child, come from, and again, from what I've seen, again, fear. So it's like, as a parent or adult in a situation of care, it is easier to use that negative reinforcement you talked about. Like, it is easier to shout and say, no, that's not the way. Like, and what's the irony is you're acting like a child by doing that. Or you must be punished for this thing you've done. This is not how we do it. And most of the time, again, it's just conforming to the easier route for the parent.
Yeah.
And so if you actually sat down and took longer, 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever it takes to say, look, I love you. It's okay. And explain the thing. Child actually will understand. Like, again, this is what children are so more intelligent, I guess, and more aware than we give them credit for. And yeah, often they will, and maybe it's not always, because again, it's every child's different specifics, but most children will be healthier adults if they were not educated by negative reinforcement or negative punishments. It's just easier.
We don't want to denigrate parents or other
no
caretakers. It's very common and understandable, that it goes beyond most people's capacity to give the child everything it needs. I can understand when parents are relieved because the child is finally gone to kindergarten or
Oh
to elementary
yes,
school.
or even just asleep. Like after a day of like trying to do things, it's like, oh, the kid's finally asleep. It's like,
Even though at school, for example, you don't get the attention, you don't get the treatment that you need. It's just
yeah,
passing on the responsibility to someone else so that
yeah.
you can get some rest yourself.
And that's society's flaw, not the parents. Like it's not a flaw ultimately, but like that's like if society provided better communities, better provision of care for the parent and the child, then it wouldn't feel like that. Like it wouldn't feel, because a lot of parents are having to do things on their own or just two people.
Yeah.
Like most parents I know, really it's just one parent that is like raising the child, whether it's male, female, non-binary, whoever. One of them is out working lots, the other one works a bit or lots too, and then they're trying to raise a child. Like
It,
this work to
it takes
raise
a
money to
village.
survive. Yeah, it takes a village, and we've lost that. We've lost that in society. So parents are stretched beyond their means, and that's
Right.
why this
Sometimes
happens.
sometimes I wonder if you shouldn't be a parent before 40, for example,
Yeah,
because
interesting.
maybe by that time you have learned more about yourself and are more able to handle children. I don't know.
Well, we haven't adapted family planning to society, so like we just still have this idea that you just have kids whenever.
Hmm.
And a lot of people are learning like or making those hard choices, because a lot of people want kids. A lot of people like they want children, and but they know that it's not fair on the child to raise them in a situation where the stresses are so high for that child, and that they won't be getting the care and love that they deserve.
Hmm.
And they're making that sacrifice. And a lot of people, like a lot of people are so critical. They're like, "Oh, you should be having children. Our generation struggled, and we still had our kids and stuff." And it's like, no, like you guys, yeah, you did that. And again, it's not necessarily your fault, but a lot of that generation traumatized our generation.
For one of my previous jobs, I first interned for 2 months, and then I felt more confident about taking the job full time, and I think it was good for the company as well. So I wonder if if everyone should be in do a parenting internship first
Yes.
in the full intensity
Yeah.
of every day to see whether they feel prepared and
Yeah.
equipped.
Yeah. And
I don't know. We don't want
it's
to put anyone
interesting.
down for doing
Well,
this.
of course,
Obviously,
no. Like
and
this is, we're not saying
obviously,
that we're not saying it's right or wrong, whatever. Again, we're just discussing things as always. We're just having a interesting discussion about things. We don't.
and I also can't imagine some centralized institution deciding
Ugh, that'd be
over who
horrible.
is fit to be a parent and who isn't.
Yeah, who judges that? It's disgusting in a
That
way,
would be
isn't
the
it?
other extreme.
Yeah. I guess it's more awareness as always, more education, more learning, more understanding, and that always leads to, hopefully, well, not always, it hopefully leads to um more enlightened choice making, I guess, more yeah, better choice making, hopefully. So that you have all the details, because again, that's important. I think a lot of parents struggle because, again, because there's no support. And therefore, if they realized that there was not as much support, they would actually be like, okay, well, let's make a support network. Let's create a situation where we're ready to have the things we need. But ultimately, we're humans, we adapt, we make it work as best we can. And as long as, again, love is the core of any situation, then yeah, it will prevail. And that
Some
sounds, sorry, go on.
some young parents, after they've been a long distance from their parents for some years, move back to the same town so that they
Yes.
can get that support from the older generation. That's a huge help as well. And I think it's very healthy for children to grow up with their grandparents.
Yes. Well, again, the more diversity and the more people around, the better. Like in raising children. So again, it takes pressures off, as we talked about. And I guess we could go back to the points about, I guess, specifically raising a child and what the therapist, was it Daniel
Mackler, yeah.
Mackler, yeah, was talking about. And that is, I guess, forcing our own way of doing things onto others, and he's obviously specifically talking about children. Like when he became an adult, he realized that he was doing things because it was to please others. It was to comply with others. And I mean, we all do that, don't we? Like day to
It's the easy
day.
way out, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so parenting is one big way how we are influenced as children. School is another one, media, just everyone around us. But a lot of it is internal as well. We are also responsible for our own development. Like we said, the older we get, the more responsibility we're able to take for that. But I would like to talk more about this what goes on during the conditioning. So Daniel Mackler talks about splitting off parts of your personality and suppressing them, pushing them down in such a way that they stay hidden long term. So and that's pretty extreme. That sounds violent to me.
Yeah,
And
conflict is the word I was going to use with violent. Violent works even better.
yeah, because you're going against your own nature, right? I believe that everyone has a true nature, that they have a very childlike core, as in, pure and innocent. And then they do all these things to avoid and minimize pain in the short term,
Yeah.
not realizing that it's unhealthy in the long term. But again, that's common and natural to do.
Yeah.
And so what goes on there? And how can we undo it later on?
It is fascinating. Like when we meet a conflict or a violence against what we want to do necessarily. So again, whether it's at school, whether it's in the job, whether it's just someone just talking to us, we have a difference of opinion, we have to make a choice. We have to figure out how to either be diplomatic, we have to figure out how to compromise, we have to say exactly what we feel, and we have to negotiate within ourselves how much we're willing to give and how much we're willing to take.
Mhm.
And often it becomes habit for most people just to take. Like it's just like, as in like that person saying what they're saying, it's going to cause conflict. So I'm going to compromise and just say I agree, or that I'll just do what they want me to do because I'm scared inside of looking different or not being liked. And so we bury it, as you say. We just it's gone, deep inside us, buried down, and with, I guess, sacrificing our true selves, like you talk about, the truth of us as what we think and feel. And when we do that, yeah, it's so damaging. Like again, the podcast is called "Who Am I?" and it's like we need to be able to even like be ourselves, whatever that might be, in order to be happy. At least a certain level. It needs to be a high level of percentage. Because again, we can't always just say in certain groups, we can't always just be ourselves. Like it just won't work. You will end up with everyone hating you. Like because you will express the thoughts and opinions that actually, correction, it's how you do it, not what you do. So
Mhm.
how we express our opinions, how we express these things. So if we just say, this is how I think, how I feel, no one else can tell me otherwise. That is in a way being true to yourself, but actually it's a very, in itself, a violent and conflicting way of doing it. Whereas if you, again, say, hey, I think this, but that's cool what you think. I like that. That's awesome. I love that. But I disagree. This is how I feel. This is how I think. Then you've given and given, not just given and taken or taken and given and whatever.
You remind me of a social dynamic that scientists like to describe with this hypothetical situation called the prisoner dilemma. Have you heard of that? It's it's interesting how often I stumbled onto that during my studies from many different perspectives. So not just sociology, but also math, logic,
Yeah.
and linguistics. And I'll just remind people quickly what that is. So the two people get captured by the authorities, and they get interrogated separately in separate rooms, and then they're both, I don't know, I guess they're both guilty of a crime, but if you what's it called, if you tell on the other person, then you get a lighter sentence.
Yeah.
But if both don't tell on each other, then they get away with the crime.
Yeah.
Or I don't know. It doesn't even matter if they're guilty or not. It's just how the authorities respond to their behavior. And because they're selfish and afraid of what the other person will do to them, they both do what the negative thing to each other. And the worst outcome happens because of that. If they both trusted each other, if they both had faith in each other, that they wouldn't tell on each other, then they would get the lightest sentence or even freedom. Anyway, that's it in a nutshell. And you just talked about something very similar, that if I have my problems and delusions that cause me to behave a certain way, then I will avoid the pain, even if it hurts you, because it just seems so much more urgent when I feel the pain. And that leads to everyone, well, more or less, not entirely. Fortunately, not everyone is like these pessimistic prisoners. But by and large, people do what they feel in the moment is necessary because it's so urgent. It's an emergency. It's my well-being, and I don't even know you that well, so why should I care? Family ties sometimes go against this, but that is a lot of natural behavior for most people.
Yeah. And again, it'd be interesting to know if it's again evolutionary or if it's social, culturally, socially developed. Because again, we live in societies based on fear, so therefore we mistrust and loneliness, isolation, all these things which make us very vulnerable to, I guess, betraying each other or self-preservation. Self-preservation, not I guess community or unit or like preservation. We very quickly will throw people under the bus, as it were, if it allows us to get what we need, because we're afraid of, because we can know that outcome, we can understand that outcome. That outcome can be, we are in control of that outcome. Whereas relying on someone else, it requires a whole different, I guess, psychology and emotional loyalty and trust, which we're just not taught anymore. You're
weird if you have this love for everyone and everything and feel unified.
It seems to be the way, as it were, at the moment. And that's a generalization again, as always, in specifics. And again, it requires programming. It requires later life changes, which are painful. Realizing these things, realizing that actually most people we know, would like. I guess we can use simpler examples in like a group situation. If someone starts spreading rumors about us, and everyone else then just listens to it and doesn't give us the benefit of the doubt, or doesn't come to us and speak to us and just believes it and then isolates us. That usually is the stronger outcome than people coming to us and going, "Hey, Stephen, this person's been saying this and this person's been saying that. What's your side?" Like, it's very quick to just follow what is being said without even thinking about it consciously. And I guess that's what the therapist is talking about. It's talking about taking a conscious response to how we deal with the process of being honest with ourselves. That's where it starts ultimately.
Right. I want to reference a YouTube video if I can find it again. It's about a Western journalist talking to I don't know, some Eastern guru or something, and saying, what is the biggest problem in the world? You know, I think he's trying to be smart, and because in his view the world is super complex, and he's interested in what this mysterious person thinks is the number one problem. And the guru says, "Who are you?" And he says, I'm a reporter for so and so." And he says, "No, that's your job. Who are you?" And he
Yeah.
says, "My name is so and so." And he says, "No, that's your name. Who are you?" And he says, "I'm a man, 40 years old." "No, that's your body. Who are you?" And this goes on for a while, and then the reporter says, "Okay, okay, I admit I don't know who I am." And then the guru says, "This is the biggest problem in the world."
Yeah. Yeah.
And think about that. What's the connection there? Let's make it explicit.
Yeah.
Uh, so what is my nature? It is, well, I don't know it fully either, but I'm learning, and it has something to do with being one with everyone and everything. That is often manifested through love, different kinds of love, you know. But I'm mainly talking about the love that you can have for a stranger on the street.
Yeah.
It is about understanding what is valuable, you know, not being driven by self-preservation and survival, but sometimes being okay with dying or going hungry
Yeah.
or losing all your possessions for this thing that is actually valuable. Because most problems in the world come from human behavior, even if it's unconscious, there would be a lot less of that if people knew more about their own nature, and by extension, the nature of everyone else and the world.
Yeah.
So I was wondering earlier, what situations do we know where this kind of attitude is fostered? You said we don't grow up learning these things.
Yeah.
It would be nice if they were taught in a way that everyone is exposed to them. But the one thing that came to my mind is self-help groups. If you go there, the expectation is for people to be vulnerable. Now, you don't have to, they don't force you to open up about your personal life. It's common for someone to sit there many times, not saying anything, just observing, just becoming familiar with people and comfortable with the idea of opening up themselves. And then when you do become vulnerable and tell people about your weaknesses, and they don't shun you or laugh at you for it, but actually admire you for being honest and courageous, you
It's
realize,
beautiful. Yeah.
oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know that this was possible.
Yeah. It's kind of mind blowing, and I've fallen into the trap of it myself. To be fair, like as a teenager, I was very honest with my emotions, almost because I couldn't control them,
Hmm.
like almost because I couldn't like process them enough. So I would tell people like I'm really sad and depressed and struggling, like not everyone on the street. I would just like, but in general, or it would just come out of me, so people would know, and people would be like, "Wow, you're so in touch with your emotions, or you're so expressive with your emotions." And especially at university, when I got to university, there were people I was more able to process them and be honest about when I cried. Like I'd cry at films, and people would just be like, "You're a man. You're not supposed to cry at things." And I'm just like,
Sissy.
I was like, "This is nonsense." I literally would tell them, "This is nonsense. I'm a human being, I can cry at things," and they loved that. They actually like loved and adored me because of that. And yeah, later in life, I've had to learn to process and not express them as much for health reasons because it can exhaust me. It can do different things to my body,
Mm-hmm.
like anxieties and panic attacks and stuff. But time and time again, I see the value of being vulnerable with people because, again, it's fear. People are afraid to be vulnerable in case they get hurt. They're opening up those wounds that they don't want salt to be poured into them. They don't want to be hurt more because it can happen. Like, again, but I actually think it happens less than we think it does. Like, most people, if you're in the right environment, if you're in a group setting with people you can trust, people you know, even strangers, actually sometimes probably better with strangers, actually, now I think about it. When you're honest, they will then start to be honest. Like music is a great example of that. Music is a great example. So the music industry at the moment, over the last 20 years, has really hammered home how easy it is to manipulate emotions. With things like X Factor, things like talent shows, they will bring on someone with an emotional story and people will connect that, and then enjoy the music because they've got this emotional connection. But in that situation, a lot of it is staged, a lot of it is falsified. But on a genuine level with music, like there's a current musician that I love at the moment. I might send you a link, William, called Ren, Ren. And he, at first I was a bit dubious because I was like, oh, this seems like it could be, again, not wolf in sheep's clothing, but disguise of like, oh, being vulnerable just to make sales, just to be popular, like, because that can happen quite often. But he seems so genuine, and he's got a lot of health problems himself, and lost a lot in his life, and he's using his talent and skill to share those things. And it's blowing up at the moment. Like over the last sort of 6 months to a year, his songs are like connecting people. People are being like, I thought I was alone in this situation. I didn't know that people like felt this way. Or you've really helped me see that there's more of this around, and I've been vulnerable with my girlfriend or my boyfriend or my family. And we need that. We do, in my opinion, we need that to be able to be more to heal, to get away these fears and these pains that we suppress inside us, to let them out. And again, there's many different ways, but that's just an example, I guess.
Yeah, it reminds me of a gathering I went to. It was also for mentally ill people. We sat in a circle, and the lady who led it wasn't it wasn't about talking about your problems. All she did was play music on her guitar, sometimes solo, sometimes with us singing along. And it was very touching music. It was, good. I think almost any instrument can do that. And rather than being loud and just exciting, it can also be soothing and get you to calm down and get your inner thoughts to calm down and give you a moment to allow your feelings and your fears to come up. And so people were crying.
Yeah.
and in pain, and she had to be careful not to let anyone in, because for some people they weren't ready for that much pain yet.
And imagine if we could do that just without an external thing. Like again, music helps us do that. But imagine if we could just chat to someone and just let it open. Like let our barriers down, let our walls down, and just express that and think about that together. And that's the oneness you talk about. That's the oneness that I think we're trying to get towards in society, or I would love to get towards in society. And yeah, I guess it's breaking the conditioning. Like, because again, we talked about it before during this episode, the conditioning that occurs to stop us from doing that, to stop us from, I guess, connecting.
I often wonder if the conditioning that we are exposed to is the result of a shadowy group who does this on purpose. And I like to explore that possibility, but not here, not today. Because you don't even need to. Even if it were not the case, we do this to each other anyway already.
Well, yeah. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter what is causing it. Ultimately, it's interesting, and I love these discussions. At some point, have that kind of discussion about things. But ultimately, yeah, it's happening. Whether we're doing it to ourselves or someone's causing us to happen, there is something causing this, and like naturally, as a consequence of just, I guess, burying our heads in the sands, of not being conscious about things.
For example, a nationwide lockdown is only possible if every normal person polices each other. There's not enough law enforcement to force everyone, in Germany's case, 85 million people, to do the same thing. We all have to be afraid of each other in order for it to work, or for everyone to pay taxes. It's the same thing. Everyone has to be afraid what will happen to yourself or your loved ones. And that is the most effective way to keep a mass of people under control. There I go again with with conspiracies rather than just the natural evolution. But still,
Well, it's interesting. Again, it's interesting. It's interesting to see again the compliance, the compromises that we make. Um, and like I'm still again, I'm of the opinion that um it was the right thing to do. But again, it's not what we do, it's how we do it again. It was done in a way that was coerced and controlled, and there should have been people that were allowed to have freedoms in certain situations, like going to see a family member who's passing away.
yeah.
Like it is disgusting that those things were stopped, especially when, again, in this country at least, it more and more is coming out at the moment. I don't know if you've seen it on like what our news stuff is, where it's more and more coming out that these politicians were having parties and like just doing whatever the heck they wanted, while the rest of the country was people were being put in jail if they broke these rules, like the common people. And it's yeah, like it's interesting to see what's coming out now, and hopefully it will lead to people waking up a little bit more. Hopefully it will lead to the opposite effect of people be like that. You know, we complied, but then we actually now realize we shouldn't be complying as much. There should be less compliance. There should be more. Again, pushing it against this is how it should be done. At least to think about it before we just go, yes, okay, this is what we should do. Because that's what we don't have as a child. Again, kind of falling full circle. That's what we don't have as a child. We don't have that ability to go, hey, this is actually like, well, we do have the ability, but then we're told, no, you shouldn't do that. Whether it's by parents, teachers,
It gets trained out of
society,
us. Yeah.
gets trained out of us, and so we need to start learning how to do that again because it's an important part of who we are. We are beings that have the ability to make choices. We have free will to say no, but we have to consciously do that. If we don't consciously do that, we will always just kind of follow and never know who we are. Like you said with the reporter, you'll just be like, oh, I'm a reporter. I'm a man that's 40. I'm this, I'm that, and not actually being like, actually, no, I'm a person who believes in love and kindness and freedom and not compromising my, I guess, inner beliefs for fear. Because again, it all comes back to fear ultimately.
I think we don't realize how much we are like teenagers. You know, it's very obvious with teenagers how much they depend on each other and their clique lifestyle.
Yeah.
They need the acceptance of other people to feel like they even exist. It's their identity, and therefore they feel, well, my theory is they feel like they will die if they lose that
Yes.
acceptance, and so they do things like wear the same clothes or do their hair the same way. But it's everywhere, and even now I'm just considering, you know, the fears that I've had, and they're becoming less, fortunately, about doing this podcast and saying publicly, more or less, um, things that friends of mine don't agree with.
Yeah.
And so I feel afraid of losing their acceptance and their friendship. And you mentioned earlier, someone who is super honest with themselves loses friends, and it can be isolating and lonely.
Yeah.
But it's worth the cost.
It's worth it because it will only be temporary. Assuming you don't isolate yourself from society completely, it'll be temporary because you'll then look if you can then actively look for those that will understand, that will connect to you. And yeah, only maybe 2 or 3 people, and it may hurt because you may want some more, but actually that is of more value and worth to you as an individual. Because you will find them. Again, it takes time, but I've got a friend who, yeah, has lost a lot of friends recently because they're trying to be more and more honest about themselves and more free to just be themselves, and because they're not, again, complying with what their friends want them to be, then their friends just disappear. And ultimately, I don't want those kind of friends. Like, I think most people don't want those kind of friends. I think most people just want a friend. But if they were honest with themselves, they want a friend that is loyal, that is accepting of who they are as an individual and who they truly are. And when you find those people, it's beautiful. Like, again, I'm very lucky to have found a lot of those kind of people in my life that I can just be silly and nonsensical with and an absolute clown. which is a big part of who I am.
Mhm.
And I don't have to fear being that. And one thing you said, I was going to talk about earlier, but you just talked about it just there, is group individuality. So we can be an individual. So, like, for example, like I like my piercings, tattoos, and makes me feel like that's my part of my. I mean, it doesn't. It's just something that I enjoy. But for a lot of people, it makes them connect them to be an individual. But also, so many other people do it as well. So many other people do these same things. So, are we an individual? Because if other people do them, that doesn't make us an individual. But actually, it does. It does make you an individual because it's what you enjoy. It's what you like. You're being honest with yourself of what you enjoy. It just so happens that other people like those things too and like
Mhm.
feeling individual. And it's more about the feeling individual. If you can find people that how they express it, that like feeling like an individual, then you can come together as a collective of individuals. And that, in my opinion, is like harmony. It is the almost perfect, if not, well, again, almost perfect, lol, contradiction, but the perfect idea to me, in theory, is having all these people that can express themselves individually with no judgment, no criticism, no fear of that. Sure, sometimes we express things and be like, actually, someone needs to go, I might need to rein that in a little bit. That's getting too extreme, or that's getting too far. Then that individual will be like, okay, you know what? Yeah, maybe that is a bit much. Thank you for expressing that. Or going, actually, no, I'm going to keep going down that way. And the person being like, yeah, cool, love you, that's cool. Being able to express all that is, again, group individuality. And I think that's what we need as human beings. I think we either think we have to go be individual and be isolated and have no one around us, or we have to be part of the herd and compromise constantly.
Mhm.
I think we seem to get stuck into that
Mhm.
situation, whereas we can have both. It just it takes time and it's hard work.
Yeah,
But sorry, go
that
on.
reminds me of my uh, of the evolution of my perspective on work. I I grew up with it because I was given the belief that university is important. Um,
Hmm.
then I grew
Yep.
up I grew up with the only prospect of getting an income is becoming an employee, and both of those things worked out somewhat, but ended up being very painful. And so I I'm kind of out of that, at least for now. I don't plan on ever going back to being an employee, but that's similar to what you were saying. You either have to fit in, like you do in a company, or being isolated in this metaphor would be being on benefits.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's not a perfect metaphor, but I'm trying to find something better in the middle, and that is being self-employed, and
Yes.
that will hopefully give me the freedom to join with other people and then take distance again and join with other people and take distance again, until I find my niche. And
Yeah.
it's also healthy to keep changing the people you work with.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. No, I'm. It sounds almost fickle, but it's very. I think it's very healthy to get to change what interactions you have with people in terms of the different types of people you're having interactions with, whether it's friends or colleagues or whatever, because that's how you'll find your people, as it were, like the people that you'll be able to
Your
connect with.
community. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and that's for me what I've seen, how I have become my most happy self, I guess, is being able to be free to express who I am with zero judgment. And um yeah. And that takes time because again it takes courage, it's painful, like we talked about earlier, ripping those wounds apart.
Does any of this get reflected in your books?
Oh, good question. That was left field and I love it. Um does any of what specifically gets reflected in the books?
Yeah, well, since you were mentioning freedom through basically freelancing, I was thinking of your writing,
Yeah.
and you said once that you cannot help but put message or valuable messages
Yes.
in your
Yeah.
stories.
I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've written recently or have written before.
I
Yeah, I
remember.
think it'll be there. Like it'll all be there. Like again, I'm trying to remember like off the top of my head without time to sort of think about it. Um, I mean, even I'm writing a little thing at the moment that's interestingly to do with again individual versus unit. Like it's, I mean,
Mhm.
without going into too much details, it's a Roman like legion has been ambushed, and there's like 25-ish soldiers that have just been separated, and they're trying to figure out stuff, and they've got a leader. So there's one person, individual, who is dealing with the group mentality and trying to survive, and has
Hmm.
to use extremes to survive, because if you don't work as a unit, you're going to die.
Is it
Like
a
if
bit
you,
like Lord of the Flies?
um, I wish I could go that complex with it. It's only going to be a 2,000, 4,000 words
Sure.
piece. It's very short, just um, but yeah, there are themes in there of that, and yeah, like I guess with a few other stories I have done
I
that.
I know an unpublished book of yours which talks about people in society having negative feelings and other having positive feelings.
Yes,
That's similar as well.
that's a massive one. Yeah, so that's an interesting one because I've had to adapt that recently. So it got a harsh edit back in January of that there's aspects to it that if I want to make it a mainstream book to sell to young adults, I have to make some serious like changes or
Hmm.
rewrite a whole bunch, which is tough for me because again, I write in a way that is that I enjoy. And I don't care how old the character is or what they look like or whatever, or how they express themselves. But if I want to reach an audience,
Hmm.
then I have to. I have to think about these things and work them out and whatever. So I've been trying so hard to make this work for the last sort of 6 months, and it's not going to at this stage. So I
Hmm.
have taken the majority of the basically it's a backstory of someone and then a present story of someone else. And so the backstory is a bit sciencey and overcomplicated, and then the forward stuff is more easy to kind of enjoy and experience. And so yes, that positive negative um, aspect in the society and how they experience emotions isolates the negatives, because in the positives they're all just like, yeah, you must be positive, like that sort of utopia
Hmm.
mentality, and how it's rejecting those that aren't the same. And so those that aren't the same, yep, try to figure out, well, where's our place in society? Where do we stand? And will that lead to extremes? And that's basically what story does. It just shows different extremes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to. I need to go through that one again at some point, just well soon, to tidy it up. But it's about 25,000 words, so it'll be a novella, and I look forward to handing that out to people just to read, because again, I think as you say, it will show how, again, individualism versus, I guess, group mentality can certainly create conflict if not, if there is no acceptance or understanding given. Because that's part of love, isn't it? Part of love is acceptance and understanding the differences. Because
Yeah.
even like when we're talking about group individuality, we're not talking about everyone being the same within that group. At least I hope not. Like I would hate for everyone to be exactly the same within a group, I guess my circle of people. Um, because like having differences is beautiful, I think, in a way.
Hmm.
Um, I think we stagnate if we just accept, if we want, I guess, was it confirmation bias? Is that what they call it? Like if you're constantly in like political, for example, if you're constantly on Facebook with always getting the same views given back to you
Being in a
of,
bubble.
yeah, you become in a bubble and you just think that like most people, because I know, because we're all very similar in our, a lot of us, not all, but a lot of us are similar in our ways of thinking. We never thought Brexit would happen. We never thought um, the Conservatives would be in as long as they have been, um, because we're just constantly like, oh, all the people I know don't think that way.
And
Therefore,
the
you know,
media.
yeah, therefore it must be, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Mhm.
But you start to realize that actually there's a lot more going on in the world, and so having a diverse look at everything gives you a better scope of, I guess, reality, the reality that we know.
Oh,
Um,
makes sense. You get a
so
you get a more representative view of
yeah,
what's actually going on, and
yeah,
that helps you to break out of your own little world a little bit,
yeah.
and thereby also your prison.
Yeah, and that's a choice. Like actually, at the end of the day, staying in that bubble sometimes is definitely fine. Like, it's a complex world that we live in, and there's a lot of scary things out there, and we have to just do whatever we can at our pace. Like, again, anything we say in this podcast, anything we talk about, we just, it's discussion points. It's not saying you should do this, you shouldn't do that. It's just, this is how we're doing things, and we hope people will be true to themselves, always, because that's what we're looking for, isn't it? Whether it be true to thine own self or whatever it is.
Whenever I look back to something I did maybe 10 years earlier, I think, oh, I was naive. Now I know better. and then I wonder, well, how will it be in 10 years when I look back to now? Why did I ever do a podcast? I mean, I was so naive and stupid. I had no right to do that. But then I think of others that I follow online, I think are so much further along than me. They will probably think of themselves as stupid and naive in 10 years as well. So it's just because you're not complete doesn't mean that you shouldn't say what you believe. So and that's how I justify what we're doing here, in a sense. It's not perfect, but it gives us a lot of pleasure, sometimes meaning. And no, it's not complete. And
it all has value. Like, we can't just not do something because we think it might later on not look cool, or not be, or think of ourselves as naive at that time. Like, this is part of the process. It's a journey. We have to do the thing. We can't just theorize it in our heads. We could sit back. Like, this is actually an ongoing joke in various things where, I was going to do a podcast, but I've never got around to it. Various comedies will always will go into like, oh, how's the podcast coming along? It's like, oh, it's been a few years. I'll get around to it eventually. And actually, they just think about doing it. Then, interesting enough, but actually doing the thing, that's the joke. It's like, you got to just do the thing. And we're doing it. We're doing the thing, and that's cool. Like, that's really good, and that's so important to us, again, as humans, to be not afraid to do the thing, not to conform to, again, our upbringings or the conditionings of society, to be honest and to be true, so that we can again find happiness and connection, because we all have the trauma, we all have the pains, we all have the sufferings, and they are like healed over time when expressed and talked about and shared with the right people.
Thank you. Let's finish on that note.
Thanks for watching.